Hey, how you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Ches, Daf 38 of Masechta Ksubis. Friends, who can tell me what Daf Lamed Ches talks about? No? Well, we continue talking about the Shaila of Mesu Mishalim, right? That if you chayiv Misa, then you don't also have to pay money if you're also chayiv for money. Now, then we get to a new Mishnah where we talk about if this girl was already engaged and then divorced, so does the fine apply or not? So here we go. We have some work to do on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. So we're going to start on Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis about 10 lines before it gets wide. The second word on the line is Kol Chayrim Asher Yochrum Min Ha'adam Lo Yipader. You got it? Again, about 10 lines before it gets wide. Second word on the line is Kol. So we have a pasuk that says, No. So we want to, the Gemara wants to teach that cherem is reference to death, right? For example, the pasuk says, Zovech lelohim yochoram, that a fellow who slaughters animal sacrifices for getchkis, for Avodah Zarah, so Yochoram, he will be killed. So we want to say that Kol Chayrim Asher Yochoram Min Ha'adam, any fellow who's chayiv Misa, Lo Yipadeh, he's potter from paying Mammon. That's what we want to say. So we see that if someone's chayiv Misa, he's potter from Mammon. So Mikasha is Lomali. Why do we need that pasuk? We already know, right? Lo Yiyeh Oson Onesh Onesh, right? We know already that if a fellow is chayiv Misa, he's potter from Mammon. So why do I need this pasuk? Well, we need it for the following brayse. How do you know that if you have a fellow who's being taken out to be executed? He's mowing the grass on Shabbos, whatever it was, and we're going to kill him. We're going to stone him. So, and a fellow yells out, I'm going to give this fellow's Eirech to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, who could tell me the distinction between Eirech and Domim? If a fellow says, right, if somebody wants to give the Domim, the value of a fellow, so then we evaluate how much, what would his value be if he had to be sold as a slave. So so that would be different for every fellow. An Eirech is a flat value, is an objective value, a flat amount, based on your age and gender. So so you have a guy, he's been taken out to be killed, he's chayiv Misa Bezdin, and then somebody yells out that he wants to give this, the condemned's Eirech to the Beis HaMikdash. So I don't remember exactly what the value is, but I'm 34 years old, Baruch Hashem, so I would have a fixed value. I don't know, what's it maybe 50 shekels or something? I don't know. Can't remember. So anyways, so that's what a guy yells out. He yells out that he's going to give the Eirech of this fellow. So minayin shelo omar klum. So how do we know that it's meaningless? That the fellow who yelled out that he's going to give the Eirech of this fellow, the condemned fellow's Eirech to the Beis HaMikdash, how do we know that it's as if he said nothing? It's irrelevant. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Kol Chayrim Asher Yochrum Min Ha'adam, anybody who's chayiv Misas Bezdin, Lo Yipadeh, he can't be redeemed. You can't give his value. You can't give his Eirech to the Beis HaMikdash. Yachol Af Kodem Shenik Badino came. Is it possible that if this fellow yelled it out even prior to the verdict, that also it would not count? It would be irrelevant. Tamalomer Min Ha'adam V'lo Kol Ha'adam. Well, it says Min Ha'adam, right? That only in some circumstances is his proclamation irrelevant, but in others it is relevant, i.e., after the verdict, yelling out that you're going to give this fellow's Eirech is irrelevant, but prior to the verdict, it is still relevant. Well, okay, fine. So the question was, what do we learn out from the pasuk of Kol Chayrim Asher Yochrum Min Ha'adam Lo Yipadeh? We learn out that if a fellow is being taken out to be executed, and a fellow yells out that he's interested in giving the condemned fellow's Eirech to the Beis HaMikdash, it's irrelevant. That's what we learn out. Ben Akavye de Omar Nerach. What about, according to Reb Chananya ben Akavya, however, says actually it's relevant. Because since it's a fixed price, it's a fixed amount, based on age and gender. So it doesn't have to do with like this person's actual value, right? This person's condemned to death. He's basically dead, right? We treat him as he's dead. He has no value at this point. So now, if we're actually evaluating how much his value is, like if we had to, determine his value to sell him, so, well, this person's valueless. He's about to be killed. But since it's an erech, and an erech is a fixed amount based on age and gender, so the fellow's basically saying that he's interested in giving this fixed amount to the Beis HaMikdash. So according to Hanani ben Akavya, actually, it's what his proclamation is relevant, and he would give that fixed amount to the Beis HaMikdash. So if that's the case, then what do you learn out from Kol Cher Mishayocher Min Ha'adam Lo Yipodeh? So what does Reb Chananya ben Akavya do with this pasuk? He needs it for the following brayse. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Lefisha matzinu lemumosim bidei shamayim shenosnin mamun miskaper loin. Because we see that people who are chayv misa bidei shamayim can pay their way out of it. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, im kofer yushas olav, that if he pays sort of a kofer. What's a kofer? Thing that you pay instead of dying thing? No, I feel like there's a better term. What's it called when you like pay money instead of dying? A trade. Let's call it a trade. A trade. I don't know, a money thingy. Dude, friends, I'm not getting caught up on this. Well, more than I already have. Anyways, what's the case over here? The case is you have a fellow, and a fellow's got a short muad. Fellow's got an ox that's already warned, and he's meant to take care, to be careful with this ox, that it shouldn't kill anybody. Sure enough, the ox kills somebody. Right? So it says, Ashor Yisokal V'gam Ba'alav Yumos, that you have to stone the ox, and also the owner needs to die. Now, we don't actually kill the owner. It says in Kofer Yushas Olav that he could pay the value of the fellow who died to his family. Right? So if he didn't actually kill, right, I think there's a separate pasuk, that we don't actually execute this fellow for the fact that his ox killed somebody, but he is chayiv misa, and what he does is he pays money. Okay, so since we find that in this case he's able to pay money instead of being executed, so yachal af bidei adam kain, is it possible that even when you have misas bezdin, that a fellow's mowing the lawn on Shabbos and we're going to stone him, so is it possible he could just pay his way out of it? It says cherim min ha'adam lo yipodeh. That if a fellow is chayiv misas bezdin, lo yipodeh, he can't pay his way out of it. Ve'en yal misos chamuros shlo nitno shigigason lichapara misos kalos shenitno shigigason lichapara minayin. Friends, what does that mean? It means that there are we're dividing capital punishments into two categories right now. A more stringent category and a more lenient category. One category is a category such as hitting your father, right? The Festivus example, right? Frank Costanza, right? Festivus. So one of the minhagim, I think it came up another time, maybe in Babylon Talmud. One of the minhagim on Festivus was that what was it? The feats of the feats of strength or something, and I don't understand what you had to fight Frank Costanza or something. Anyway, so I think George was chosen. So I think he said, "Was it shut up and hit your father" or something like that. So of course, in Torah Judaism, that would not be encouraged, because for this exact reason, actually, right? Because if you hit your father and make him bleed on purpose, so you're chayiv misa. I'm not sure what kind of misa. Maybe we cut off your head or something. I mean, at the end of the day, you're gonna be dead. So right. So where were we? Right. So there's something like hitting your father that if you do it on purpose and you make him bleed, so you're chayiv misa. Now, if you do it by accident, I mean, you're just kind of stuck with it, right? It's not, you can't bring a korban chatas, as opposed to, let's say, chilul Shabbos. So if you do it on purpose and there are witnesses, etc., so then you chayiv misa. But if you do it by accident, you can bring a korban chatas and get atonement. So we want to break this into like two categories, right? So something like hitting your father, right? Where if you do it on purpose, you chayiv misa, but if you do it by accident, there's no way to get atonement. You just kind of, stuck with it. So that's a more stringent category than something like Chilul Shabbos, where if you do it on purpose, you chayav misa, but if you do it by accident, you can at least do something about it. You can bring a korban chatas. So therefore, the Gemara wants to suggest that when we say Cherim min ha'adam lo yipadeh, that when you chayav misas bezdin, you can't pay your way out of it. Maybe that's only by the stringent things, something like hitting your father. If you chayav misa for hitting your father, so then you can't pay your way out of it. But maybe something like Chilul Shabbos, which is a less stringent case, in that if you did it by accident, you can bring a korban chata, so that makes the whole category less stringent. So maybe you would be able to pay your way out of skila. So where am I? So let's read it again. So all I know is that you can't pay your way out of the more stringent capital cases, such as hitting your father. That there's no way to be atoned for it. Misos, right? There's no way other than through death to get atoned. Right? Misos kalosh nitna shigasun l'chapara. However, when it comes to something like Chilul Shabbos, that if you do it on purpose, you chayav skila, but if you do it by accident, you're being korban chatas, or killing somebody. If you kill somebody on purpose, I think we cut off your head. But if you kill somebody by accident, there's a remedy. You go to the Ir Mikla. So I might think in those cases you could pay your way out of it. So Talmud Lomar Kol Cherem V'lo Kol Cherem. So therefore it says not just Cherem Min Ha'adam, it says Kol Cherem. Right? Any time that you chayav misas bezdin, you cannot pay your way out of it. Whether it's a stringent thing, whether it's a more relatively lenient thing, you cannot pay your way out of it. Now, frek the Gemara V'lo Mimela Milo Sikhu Kofar Shmas Mino. But don't we already know that when it comes to killing somebody, right? Murder is a category in which there is what to do if you do it by accident. You go to the Ir Miklat. So that makes it sort of in the more lenient category, as opposed to like hitting your father, where there's no way, if you do it by accident, there's nothing you can do. So murder is in that more lenient category where if you murder somebody by accident, there is something for you to do. You go to the Ir Miklat. So, and it says Milo Sikhu Kofer, and it says in the context of murder, it says Lo Sikhu Kofer, don't accept payment. So don't we already know that in this more lenient category, you cannot accept payment, you have to die? So, V'lo Memelim Lo Sikhu Kofer Shmas Mina, Lo Sishko Mamona Mine V'Tiftere, right? Don't I already know from there that by this more lenient category, you cannot accept money in place of death? Kol Cherem Lamali. In which case, why do I need the pasuk of Kol Cherem? What do I learn out from that? It's not teaching me the more lenient category, because I already know that from the fact that it says Lo Tzichu Kofer in the context of murder. So Amarami Bar Chama, Itzrich, no, I still need Kol Cherem, because Sakadati Chamina, I may have thought it said Hanimile, Heichet Hargo Derech Aliyah, Shlo Nitna Shigosu L'Chapara. I may have thought that when the pasuk says Lo Tzichu Kofer, maybe that's in a more stringent category where there's nothing you can do in a case of shogeg. For example, if you killed the fellow, if you murdered him on an upswing, if you took a sword and you slice upwards and kill the fellow, so in that case you don't go to an Ir Miklat, because the pasuk says, right? What was it? Oh, nofel olav vames, something, right? V'yapel olav. Right? It says that davka, you have to come down on the fellow. But if you come up on the fellow, then you wouldn't go to an Ir Miklat. Okay, so if you hit him in an upward swing, so then there's really nothing you can do, even if it was by accident. So therefore, I might think that when it says in the pasuk Lo Sikhu Kofer, it means in the more stringent case, when you kill the fellow in an upswing, maybe that's where you can't pay your way out of it. But if you killed him in a downswing, which is a sort of a more lenient category, in that on the downswing, if you do it by accident, you can go to Ir Miklat, maybe you could pay his way out of it. So if you kill a fellow on a downswing, maybe you could pay your way out of it. So animini der hecha dehargo der chaliyah shelo nitna shigasu lechapara avahargo der chirida. But if you killed him on the way down, the nitna shigasu lechapara, that if you were to do it by accident, you would be able to go to Ir Miklat ema nishka mamona mine v'niftrei. So I might think that if a fellow killed somebody else on purpose, deliberately, on a downswing, where this is something that if he would have done it by accident, you'd be able to go to an Ir Miklat. So therefore, it puts it in a more lenient category. So maybe he should be able to pay his way out of the death penalty. Kamash malan. Therefore, we need this pasuk of kol cherim to say no, even on the downswing, you can't accept money. You gotta kill him, I think, by cutting off his head. Amarle, Rave, says Rave, Hami de Tanat v'chizkiya nafka. Rave says, meh. Rave says we already know that there's no difference between the upswing and the downswing from Tana Devei Chizkiya that we learned the other day. Where did we learn it? On Daf Lamed Hey, 3 days ago. The Tana Devei Chizkiya, we was taught in the Beis HaMedrash of Chizkiya, Make Adam or Make Behema. We compare, I think it's killing a fellow and killing an animal. Well, definitely killing a fellow, right? Because Make Adam, you must, I assume Make Behema Yishamina means if you kill the animal. Kill the animal. So the Tana Devei Chizkiya, Maka Adam, Maka Beim. So we compare killing a fellow and killing an animal. Maka Beim, just like when it comes to killing an animal. Lo Chilak Debo. There's no difference. Ben Shogeg Lemezid. There's no difference between if you kill the animal by accident or on purpose. Ben Miskaven L'Shem Miskaven, if you had intention or not. Ben Derech Yerida L'Derech Aliyah, whether you killed him on the downswing or the upswing, the animal. Lefotro Moment El Chayva Moment, you are going to be liable to pay for the animal. By a killing a fellow, there's no difference whether you do it by accident or on purpose, whether intentional or not, whether you kill the fellow in a downswing or an upswing, to say that he'd be chayiv money, rather he would be potter from paying money, right? If you kill a fellow, so you're going to be potter from paying money, as we learned the other day. That even if there was no hasra or anything like that, you're still going to be potter from paying money. So what do we see? So sort of as a side effect from this brisa, we see that there's no difference between the upswing and the downswing. So therefore, we have two psukim. One is lo sikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach. The other pasuk is kol cherem asher yochrom laHashem. Both psukim seem to be teaching that you cannot pay your way out of the death penalty. The question is, why do we need two psukim? Rami Bar Chama suggested, well, maybe one is for the upswing, one's for the downswing. But says Rava, there's no difference between upswings and downswings. So Ella, Omar, Rami Bar Chama, rather what we need this pasuk to teach me is that when you're chayiv misa, you are potter from mammon. Right? So meaning when it says, so when it says that, somebody who's chayiv misa, he's potter from mammon, I needed to teach me that because I may have thought, that for example, if you knock out somebody's eye and you kill him at the same time, from the same blow, so then in that case, you're chayiv misa, but you're potter from mammon. But if you're blind, if you knock out the guy's eye and then you kill him in some other way, so I might think that in addition to paying for the eye, in addition to being chayiv misa, you have to pay for the eye. So therefore, we have kol cherim to say that no, even when you kill the value of the eye and the killing of the fellow are two separate actions, still he's going to be potter. But Rava says to him, but we also already know that from a different Tana Devei Chizkiya. The Tana Devei Chizkiya, ayin tachas ayin v'lo ayin v'nefesh tachas ayin. It says that an eye for an eye, but not an eye for and a soul for an eye. Therefore, the point is that if you're chayiv misa, whether because you killed him while knocking out his eye, or whether you knocked out his eye and killed him in some other action, still, once he's chayiv misa, right, you don't pay for the eye, right? Ayin tachas ayin, right? You only if you knock out his eye, so you pay for the eye. But if you kill him, you don't pay for the eye and also get the death penalty. You would only get the death penalty. So then, what do we learn out from kol cherim? So Rav Ashi says, Itzrich, I need kol cherim asher yochra min ha'adam lo yipada because hakadartech aminu ho v'chidishu shechidshutoi b'knas. Well, so says Rav Ashi, I may have thought to say that when it comes to fines, that if a fellow is chayiv misa, and there's also a fine involved, maybe in that case, ha'afagav demikto mishalim, I might think that even though he's chayiv misa, he would still have to pay the fine, since a fine is like a chiddush, right? Fines are things that don't necessarily logically make sense, but we fine you nonetheless. So I might think that since fines are things that are not necessarily logic, but they're a chiddush, so therefore, even though you're chayiv misa, you might still have to pay for the fine. Kamash Malon. Therefore, the pasuk says, no, kol cher mashayochro min ha'adam lo yipodeh, that whenever you chayiv misa, you're going to be potter from paying, even if it's a fine. What about according to Rabbi, who says that actually, when you chayiv misa, you actually do pay for fines. So what do you learn out from kol cherim? Hi kol cherim ma'avad le sarva lo ketana kama to Reb Chananya ben Akabya. So Rabbi will just hold like the Tanakama, who we said learns out from that pasuk of if you have a fellow who's chayiv misa, right, he's being taken out to be executed, and a fellow yells out that he's going to give his erech, the erech of the condemned, to the Beis HaMikdash, and the Tanakama says that it's as if this fellow yelled out senseless babble, nothing, and he doesn't pay the value. So Rabbi would say that is what we learn out from Kol Cher Mishayochram Min Ha'adam Lo Yipodeh, that if this fellow yells out that he's going to give the erech of a condemned to death fellow, it's as if he says, excuse me, nothing. So that Rabbi would hold like the Tanakama. But according to Chanani ben Akavya, so we would say that the Chiddush is to say that even by fines, you would not pay. If you chayiv misa, you would not pay for any fines that you might be liable for. So friends, now we get to a new Mishnah. Who's ready for a new Mishnah? Nairishin is arsav and iskarsha. If you have a naira that was engaged, and then she got divorced, right? So the pasuk says, "Ki yimtza ish naira besula asher lo orasa." So if a fellow finds a virgin who was not engaged, so Rabbi Yosef Aglili Omer ein lo knas. So Rabbi Yosef Aglili says, well, right, naira besula asher lo orasa. She was never engaged. Once she becomes engaged, even if she already got divorced, and she might, right, she's still a besula. They never got married. She's a besula. She's not currently engaged, but asher lo orasa, that she was never engaged. So Rabbi Yosef Aglili says that once she's engaged, ein lo knas, then there would be no fine by ones umefater. Rabbi Kiva Omer yesh lo knas uknas la'atzma. Rabbi Kiva says that there is a fine, and she gets the fine. So when it says nar besula asher lo orasa, when the pasuk says that if there's ones umefater by this fine and it goes to the father, that's if she has never been engaged. But if she's been engaged and then divorced, so then it goes to her rather than the father. My time to Rabbi Yosef Aglili, the Gemara wants to know how come Rabbi Yosef Aglili says that once she's engaged, even if then she gets divorced, there's no fine at all. Amar Kol, the pasuk says asher lo orasa. It has to be a naira besula that was never engaged. Ha-orasa ein lo knas. But once she was engaged, there's no longer a knas, and by ones umefater, there would no longer be a 50 shekel fine once she was engaged. Rabbi Akiva, asher lo orasa le'avia. Look, when the pasuk is talking about that she was never engaged, that's when the pasuk says that the 50 shekels goes to the father. Ha-orasa le'atzma. But once she was engaged and then got divorced, then the money goes to her rather than to the father. El mi'ata naira v'lo bogeris. But one second, Rabbi Akiva, if you're saying that, it says naira b'sula asher lo orasa, and you're saying that it's not to the complete exclusion of somebody who's engaged, it means that the rules change once she's engaged, and that instead of the fine going to the father, it goes to her. So let me ask you a kasha. When it says naira v'lo bogeris, then when it says that she has to be a naira to the exclusion of a bogeris, would you say the same thing there? Would you say, yeah, what it means is that the fine goes to the father for a naira, but if she's a bogeris, it goes to her. V'lo be'ula, besula v'lo be'ula. Would you say the same thing also when it says that she has to be a besula in the pasuk, implying that if she was a be'ula, that she had already had bia, so then would you say the same thing, Rabbi Akiva, that then there's still a fine, but it goes to her? Legamre. No, it means that it only applies to a besula to the complete exclusion of a be'ula. It only applies to a naira to the complete exclusion of a bogeris. That if she's a bogeris or a be'ula, there wouldn't be any fine whatsoever. So hachanami legamre. So here also, when it comes to asher lo orasa, it means that she was never engaged, and once she was engaged, then there's no fine whatsoever. So Amalach Rabbi Akiva would respond to you. Hailo orasa mibarle lichdetanya. He says, look, I can explain it, or Rabbi Akiva could respond to you that, well, it could be explained like the following brisa, which has a conflicting opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which we will ask about on Amud Beis. Asher lo orasa prad l'nayush nisaysev nisgarsha, that when the pasuk says that we're talking about a besula who was never engaged, to the exclusion of somebody who was engaged in a divorce, that if she got engaged and then divorced, so there would be no fine whatsoever. She'ein lo knas de Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Yosef Glili would say that if she got engaged in a divorce, there would be no fine whatsoever. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Yesh la knas v'knos lavia. Rabbi Akiva says that nothing changes. That it says, right, Asher lo orasa. That, so the question is, why do I need the pasuk to say it? But it says, right, so we're saying that, that even if she was engaged and then divorced, the money still goes to the father. But I didn't know saying, we could say that, and it's also logical, because because I could bring you two examples of money that her father merits too. One is kesef kiddusha. If a father marries off his daughter who's a naira, so then he gets the kesef kiddushin, and also right by onus mefate he would get the money of the fine. So ma kesef kiddusha afal pishin nisaysev nisgarsha leavia. Just like when it comes to the money from kiddushin, even if she got engaged and then divorced and then engaged again, the father would continue to get the kesef kiddushin on the second time as well. So av kesef kanoso. So also, when it comes to the fine by an onus mefata, even though she got engaged and subsequently divorced, nothing changes. The money would still go to her father. But if that's the case, then what's pshat with Asher lo orasa? The pasuk specifically says we're talking about a besula who was never engaged. Rabbi Akiva, you're saying ignore that. Even if she was engaged and divorced, the money still goes to the father. Nothing changes. So what's the point of saying Asher lo orasa? Why is the pasuk wasting its breath? It's there to teach us a gzeira shava. It has no other purpose there other than to teach us a gzeira shava. Nemar kan asher lo orasa v'nemar lahalan asher lo orasa. It says asher lo orasa by onus, and it says asher lo orasa by mifate. Where am I? Asher lo orasa makan nun avlo nun. Just like by onus, we're talking about 50 coins. So also by mefate, even though it doesn't say 50, we're talking about 50 coins. Malalan shkolim afkan shkolim. Just like mefate, it says, right, kesef yishkol kamor besulos shkolim. So just like by mefate, we're talking about shkolim. So also by onus, we're talking about shkolim. Right? So therefore, we know that from the gzeira shava, we know that both by onus and by mefate, the fine is 50 shkolim. Fine. Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Now, Rabbi Akiva, my chaz is the asher lo orasa l'gzeira shava. Now, Rabbi Akiva, 1 second. Why are you saying that we use that orasa, asher lo orasa, is available for gzeira shava? Uvesula lemute beula, and when it says besula to the exclusion of a beula, that there would be no fine when it comes to beula. Right? So when it says asher lo orasa, we don't actually learn anything out from the implication of the pasuk. Rather, it just means it's gzeira shava. But from besula, it's the exclusion of beula. Ema besula gzeira shava, asher lo orasa prad l'nayush nisaysev nisgarsha. Why don't I say punkt vakert? Why didn't I say that besula we don't learn out anything from? It's just available for the gzeira shava. But from asher lo orasa, it excludes a fine in a situation of a girl who was engaged and then divorced. That if she was engaged and divorced, then there would not be a fine. So we say it makes sense to say that asher lo orasa we're not learning out anything from. It's just free to make a gzeira shava. Because she's still a naira besula, right? Meaning if you have a girl who's a besula, and then she gets engaged, and then divorced, she's still a naira besula. So therefore, she can get engaged and divorced and still be a besula. So therefore, it makes sense that we're not actually learning, right, that asher lo orasa would be available for the gzeira shava, and that we don't learn out anything technical from it, because regardless of if she was engaged or engaged and divorced, she's still a naira besula. So therefore, we can kind of like keep the pasuk intact, if we say that we don't learn anything from asher lo orasa and just have it available for the gzeira shava. Now, adrabah, the Gemara says, but you could also say punkt vakert. You could say the opposite. Besula l'gzeira shava. Let's say that besula we don't learn anything from, and it's just free for us to use for gzeira shava. Shari'ani kore b'asher lo orasa. Because regardless of if she's a besula or if she's a beula, we could still have the pasuk of asher lo orasa, right? Meaning it says in the pasuk, a girl who is never engaged. So let's say that, let's learn out, yes, she has to never be engaged, but if she was engaged and then divorced, then it doesn't apply anymore. And regardless of if she's a besula or if she's a beula, the main thing is that she was never engaged. And regardless if she's a besula or a beula, you could still, have the simple explanation of asher lo orasa. As long as she was never engaged, we're being mekayim the pasuk of asher lo orasa. So why don't we say that besula is available not to learn out anything from, but just for the gzeira shava, but not to sort of imply anything regarding besula versus beula. Right? And saying regardless of if she's a besula or beula, it doesn't really matter because she's still lo orasa, as long as she was never engaged. That's an important thing. So mistavra or ishtani gufa va lo ishtani gufa. So we say, look, if we need this gzeira shava in order to learn out that we're talking about 50 shkalim, both by onus and mefata. So the question is the gzeira shava from besula or is the gzeira shava from beula? Right? Is it that what's important is that we're talking about a girl who's a besula, or is it important that we're talking about a girl who was never engaged? So we say, look, it makes more sense, the Gemara wants to say that it makes more sense to say that the important thing is that she's a besula, because if she was a beula, then that means that already before the onus and the mefata, right, this case, she was already a beula. Her body, there was already a change to her body, and therefore we want to say that sort of this ones mefata would be less significant since, we're talking about a physical change to her body which had already taken place prior, as opposed to, if we say that, if we were to say that what's important is that she's like never been engaged, that has sort of, whether she was engaged or engaged and divorced, that's sort of less significant because it's not actually a physical change to her body. And therefore, it makes sense to say that asher lo orasa is sort of what's free for the gzeira shava, and we say that she has to be a besula as opposed to a beula, because that implies that involves a physical change to her body, as opposed to asher lo orasa. We're not going to be super makpid on that she has to never have been engaged, because whether she's engaged, whether she wasn't engaged, doesn't necessarily have implications, like physical implications, and therefore, the Gemara wants to say that logically, that would be sort of the lighter one that we could say, let's not learn out anything from that one and have it available for the gzeira shava, but we'll be more makpid on when it says besula, that she has to be besula as opposed to a beula. Fine. Okay. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Haisvar Minole. Now, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, how does he know that there has to be 50 shekels by onus and mefata, right? Meaning, Rabbi Akiva said, look, we don't learn out anything from asher lo orasa. It's just available for gzeira shava to learn out that it's 50 shekels both by onus and mefata. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he says, no, asher lo orasa is the exclusion of if she was engaged and then divorced. They wouldn't, then the knas doesn't apply. So then how does he know that there's 50 shekels both by onus and by mefata? So nafkale miditani learns it out from the following brayse. Kesef yishkol kamora besulos, as we've seen before, that it says by mefata, it says kesef yishkol kamora besulos, sheizeh kamora besulos, that v'mora besulos kozeh, that it says besulos both by onus and by mefata. So we compare the two to say that both by onus and mefata we're talking about 50 shekels. Fine. Fine. Okay. Kasha de Rabbi Akiva. No. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva had said that if she was engaged and then divorced, the money goes to her. But in the Brisa, he says if she was engaged and divorced, it still goes to the father. Nothing changes if she is engaged and then divorced. So, what's the deal? On the one hand, we're saying that if she is engaged and then divorced, it goes to her. On the other hand, it says it continues to go to the father. Which one is it? So, so we say, well, it's two different Tanoim, right? Of course, Rabbi Akiva had a lot of students. So, it's two different teachers who were, or they don't, I guess, necessarily have to be students, but two different teachers of Brises were claiming to have the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and they were conflicting as to what Rabbi Akiva actually said. Bishlama Rabbi Akiva demasnisin lo asis gzeir shava umafkale likrami pshati. So the Gemara says, look, I have an easier time understanding Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah, because Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah at least keeps the verse intact, right? It says naira besula asher lo orasa, that she was never engaged, that these halachis of the 50 shekels going to the father is in a situation where she was never engaged. But if she was engaged, then it's different, and it doesn't go to the father anymore, it goes to her. And we don't have this gezerah shava that's completely changing everything and saying that no, it even goes to the father even after, even if she was engaged and divorced, it still goes to the father. Then what's the point of saying asher lo orasa? We say, well, we actually don't learn out anything, it's just for a gezerah shava. But it's easy, it's weird that basically the pasuk is basically meaningless. So Rabbi Akiva the Braise asik gezerah shava umafkim pshata legamri. But according to Rabbi Akiva in the Braise, right, who says that even if she was engaged and divorced, the money still goes to the father. So it's weird because now we basically don't learn out anything, right? The pasuk is like irrelevant. It says Nari Basula Shelo Orasa, right? Basula who was never engaged, but the truth is that even if she was engaged, nothing changes, which is weird. Amr Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Kribe Asher Lo Arusa. So it says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, no, you can read it, not Asher Lo Orasa, not that she was never engaged, but she is not currently engaged. Right, that as long as she's not currently engaged, so then the money would go to the father. Even if she got divorced afterwards, the money would still go to the father. Arusa baskilai. But one second, obviously, if she is an arusa, then she wouldn't be paying money, because if she's an arusa, right? Then obviously, if she was an arusa, then there wouldn't be any fine, because in arusa there would be, right? If she a nara morasa, the punishment is skila. So obviously, if he's chayiv skila, he wouldn't be paying the fine. So sakadati chaminaho v'chidishu shechidje Torah b'knas. Well, I may have thought to say that since a fine is a chiddush, afagav the miktul mishalim, I may have thought to say that even though he's being killed in chayiv skila for sleeping with a narim or also, I might think that still he would have to pay the fine. So chidushu shechidju Torah b'knas avagav demiktul mishalim. Where am I? Avagav demiktul mishalim. Oh, period. Avagav demiktul mishalim. Right. So I may have thought to say that even though he would be chayiv skila for sleeping with an aram marasa, he would still have to pay the fine. So kamash malan, the chiddush over here is that so what it's teaching is that no, he doesn't have to pay the fine, even though the knas is a chiddush. Okay, fine. So the Rabbi Amar Chidushu Shechidja Torah B'Knas Val Gav Demikto Mashalim. What about according to Rabbi, who says that actually, when you chayv misa and you have a knas to pay, you do pay the knas. So Michael Amos, what we would say according to Rabbi, Savala Rabbi Akiva Demasnisin. Well, Rabbi would hold like the version of Rabbi Akiva from the Mishnah that the money goes to her, and that that when it says Naira Besula Shelo or Rasa, it's saying that the money goes to the father when she's not engaged, but if she was engaged, then it goes to her, and it's not like the Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa that says that either way it goes to the father, and then we have to touch the pasuk to say Arusa. He wouldn't say like that, because he would say that even if she was engaged, there would still be right. You would still have to pay the money. He would still have to pay the fine. Tana Rabbanan the Rabbis taught Knaso Lemi. Who does the fine go to? La'avia, to the father. B'yeshom la'atzma. Those who said the money goes to her. La'atzma amai. Why would it go to her? Here we're talking about a naira that was engaged and then divorced. And this right, these two opinions in the Brisa, that when one says it goes to the father, one says it goes to her, it's basically talking about a girl who was engaged and then divorced, and it's like the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah and the Brisa, that Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah says that the money goes to her, and the Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa says that the money goes to the father. Friends, that was Daf Lamed Ches of Masechta Ksubis. The beginning of the Daf talked about when, right, we had another pasuk, right, it says, Kocher Mesha Yochram Mino Adam lo yipode. So we wanted to say that that's talking about that if somebody's chayiv misa, then he's potter from mammon. Don't we already know that somebody's chayiv misa is potter from mammon? So we said, well, it could be talking about a situation where somebody's being taken out to be executed, and that somebody else says that he's going to give his erech to the Beis Hamikdash, that he's basically said nothing. The kasha was then, what about according to Reb Chananya ben Akav, who says that actually he would give the erech? So what do you learn out from that pasuk? What we learn out is that somebody who is chayiv misa's bezdin, he cannot pay his way out of it. We had different chilukim there about why don't I already know that from we had made distinctions between sort of more stringent misas and less stringent misas. In the end, what we ended up learning out from kocherim ashayochom min adam lo yipada, what we ended up learning out is that if you have a fellow who's chayiv misa and knas, so then you would be potter from the knas. As lo yipada, right, you wouldn't have to pay the knas. Then we got up to a new Mishnah, which basically focused on the machlokas between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili when it comes to a girl who is engaged and then divorced. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, like the pshat in the pasuk, that once she's engaged, even if she gets divorced, so then there's no longer a knas. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, there is a knas and it goes to her. We then saw another Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa that says that even if she was engaged and divorced, the money continues to go to the father. We said it was two teachers of Brises, sort of giving conflicting sort of Brises of Rabbi Akiva. Friends, that was Daf Lamed Ches of Masechta Ksubis. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.